Hey everyone, welcome to the Beauty in Between podcast. I'm Gabe, and this is my wonderful wife.
Katie.
And yeah, with the first episode, we just wanted to give you an idea of who we are as a couple and everything, and also tell you a little bit about where we come from family wise, and then also setting up to what we're trying to do with this podcast or where the kind of idea came from to start this whole thing.
Yeah, we figured if you're going to dedicate time to listen to us, that it would probably be fair for us to introduce ourselves to you. And hopefully, this can be the beginning of ongoing dialogue and conversation that sprouts out of this podcast.
Yeah. So some of the things we want to go through, I guess the first thing with you, Katie, my wonderful wife, like I said, who are you? Where do you come from?
Well, okay, I think it's always good and right to share a little bit about like family background as far as nobody's created in a vacuum, and obviously that includes me. So my parents, my father is Vietnamese, and he was the oldest of the kids of that side of my family when our family actually came over to the States in 1975, sort of escaping the effects of what was the Vietnam War. And then my mom's side of the family is a combo of Irish, Czech, Bohemian, I think a little bit of like British or UK or something in that vein. And up to a couple of generations ago, there was a big chunk of that family that lived in Iowa and then went down to the DFW area eventually. And that is actually where my parents met. I am also a child of divorce. So probably throughout a lot of this podcast, you'll hear me refer to my biological father as opposed to my ex-stepdad, as opposed to my dad, who I refer to. That's how I refer to God often. So that is certainly a piece of my story. I also just have a background of having a BA in English with teaching certification. That's what I went to undergrad for. And then 4 days after I graduated undergrad, I decided that I was going to immediately start my master's program of Christian leadership because I also went to seminary. And I have a background of theater lighting design. That is sort of my like what do the kids call it now? I don't make money from it anymore. It's just a hobby. My
A side hustle?
unmonetized side hustle. For some
Unmonetized
most
side
part.
hustle.
Yeah. That's not necessarily generating anything, but it's nice that I could still lead into that area.
Yeah.
But yeah, and as just the very basic, um, like who am I and how am I wired? I lean towards extroverted. I am certainly an external processor. And for those who Enneagram, I'm an 8-wing-7, and for those who Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFJ.
Yeah. Just to clarify for everybody, so you went through two divorces in your family, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Fair. Good question.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
just want to make sure. I think some
my
people might have caught
biological
it.
parents, my biological parents got divorced when I was 4 and my little sister was 2. I'm sure at some point we'll sort of unpack um the sort of older sister protector um role that I sort of stepped into at a very young age, not necessarily by choice, but there were just certain elements that just called for it. I had to step into that at a younger age. And my mom remarried when I was like 8 or 9 or something along those lines.
Hmm.
And with that marriage, it sort of, the divorce was almost, it happened on the opposite end of the spectrum. The first one was, I would say, probably more stereotypically volatile and like violent, maybe, whereas the second one was more like passive aggressive, emotional, crazy things that were going on, or like strange decisions being made in the background. So yeah, that happened when I was a sophomore in high school. So there's a large part of my story where honestly, as far as who my family is and who I grew up understanding my family to be, it was really my mom, my sister, and me, because on my mom's side of the family, the majority of the side of that family is actually no longer alive. Um, and on my father's side of the family, through the divorce and sort of some of the different points of chaos that happened, we had contact with them and then we didn't have contact with them. And then as I think the year before we got married, or something pretty soon leading up to us getting married, was when I started gaining contact again with more of that side of my family. So
Hmm.
there's also a lot of pieces of sort of rediscovering who I am in the context of the Vietnamese side of my family that I remember I have developmental memories with as a young kid. Um, but yeah, so a lot of learning and a lot of intersecting threads. Yeah. What about you, Gabe? Who are you? Tell the people.
Yeah, I found myself already wanting to ask you questions because I think there's so many things that like I've learned over the years that would be so useful for so many people. So I'm gonna refrain from doing any of those right now. But yeah, so for me, I come from a background where my dad's side is Mexican, and my mom's side is half white from her mom, and then half Iranian or Iranian from her dad. And so kind of have a little bit of like a 50-50 split where I haven't ever really been connected to the Caucasian side of the family very much. There are some people within the family, and they're real like country bumpkin, country outlaws sort of people, and they'll tell you some crazy stories of getting into bar fights and all of these insane things happening, like it was the Wild West. But don't have a huge connection to that side because my grandmother passed away right before I was born, and there was also not a great divorce between her and my grandpa. Um, and so, yeah, with the grandpa, that side of the Iranian side is all still over there in Iran. Really, he's the only one that's made it out of there. And he has two kids, my mom and my uncle. And so those are really the only connections I've had. But in my childhood, the connection to that Iranian side was very strong because my grandpa would take me every single week to go play tennis and to go do these different things. So he really spent a lot of time with me and made a lot of awesome foods for me. But never really got to experience the communal sense of that. And with the Mexican side, that's where that more communal sense came from, is having such a big family here in Austin, Texas. Born and raised, and there's so many of members of the family that are still over here. Um, yeah, and so it's awesome being able to interact with them, on holidays and stuff. I used to hang out with them all the time as a kid, and now, yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. We're kind of split up between the sides sometimes, but it's a fun amalgamation of things.
And something that you just said actually reminded me of something very important that I forgot to share, which is that I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, and that we now live in Austin, Texas. So I feel
And
like,
she definitely reps the city.
oh, yes,
Big
I
time.
do. In fact, if you ever find me on Facebook and you look at my cover photo, if you know what that's from, then you know Houston. Yeah, that's to support the people as a side quest.
Cool.
Okay. So this episode wasn't exactly supposed to be, interviewing about us, because really, hopefully, the idea is to introduce the idea, the hope, the vision, the dream behind this podcast. But something that came to mind that I think would be fun to share is, Gabe, what would you say you're passionate about? What are things that you're passionate about, and how that wound you up starting this podcast with me?
So, as you said, you're the extrovert, and on the other hand, I am the introvert. So we complete each other in that sense, but I am so much of an introvert, but I love talking with people and hearing stories. And then also just being able to communicate with people, make sure they feel heard, they feel seen. So that's why, as an introvert, I don't really tend towards the larger groups and everything, but I love hanging out with people one on one or in smaller groups and really being able to interact with them in a intentional time. And so, yeah, just with that, I love helping people out. The business that I do right now, or that I'm doing with the founder of it, it's called Loyal Home Concierge. And so we help people within the house do handyman type of stuff. And yeah, I love solving people's problems. But if I can't solve it, I love to listen to them and make sure that they know they've been hurt, and then helping give them as many resources as I can. And also helping to normalize things. I know people go through day to day life all the time, and they feel like they're experiencing all these things that are happening in their lives. And people are telling them what they should do or who they should be. And yeah, I just want them to be able to more so embrace themselves. What about you? Because I know your thing
Again.
is similar, but in a different sense, coming from a different place.
Well, I did mention that I'm an eight, so I'm passionate about everyone around me and everything. That's good. And passionate about breaking down systems of injustice and ongoing points of harm for people. I say that sort of as a joke, but that is true. And I would say that a lot of that roots down, though, as far as if I had to distill what I'm passionate about into a sort of what's the root of it.
Hmm.
Something that I care a lot about is honestly just helping the people who I get to come into contact with, the people around me, whether that's the business owners that I get to work with as part of my job, as part of a local nonprofit in Austin that I work with, or if it's just people that I come across at church or playing pickleball because that's something we do or whatever it is. I'm just really passionate about helping people to really live into and step into the fullness of who they are. And depending on the context, sometimes I'll use the language of like the fullness of who God has created them to be. But at the risk of sounding like too churchy, but there really is something to be said for the fact that we all exist as individual human beings, and there is a genuine gift that everyone brings into the room when they step into that space. And I think something that I caught myself doing from a young age, there's a friend of ours who I've known for almost 20 years, who was like deathly introverted when we were in school when we were little. I will never forget turning around to her and saying, "Hey, you're really quiet, and I know we don't talk that much, but we're in choir together, and I just want you to know that one day we're going to be best friends." Because I knew that every single time she would actually share in class, she always had such good insight. And it was just, I've kept doing that. I've like collected introverts along my journey, um, including you. And a lot of that, I think, is that I'm passionate about making and holding space because, I do lean extroverted. I am more able and more comfortable with just sort of leaning into a space and taking up space. But one of my absolute favorite joys and honors in life is sharing that space with the other people in the room, whether it's that they're introverted or they just have a different cultural background or style of communication and they're not comfortable with engaging or whatever that is. But like making and holding space to be able to hand to the other people in the room who are all there, but maybe aren't offering their thoughts. Um,
Yeah. So
so
like
yeah.
when we go into a party, we both come at the same way of finding that person sometimes that's in the corner, just kind of hiding away from things. We're different people before that happens, but once that happens, we come to it for the same reason. We want people to live in their fullness and to really achieve, who they're supposed to be and their full potential. And through that, also helping them see the joy in life, like the joy of who they are and what they bring to the table, and the joy of the different things that they're able to, see and be a part of or experience whenever they're living in this fullness and are able to, help excite themselves and know that they are there for a reason.
Yep. That's so good. And something that I always love is I almost feel like it's a race whenever we're in some social gathering of who's going to find the like person on the outskirts or the margins, whichever one of us finds them first. Like we always engage with them differently, which is funny. But with all of that being said, I think that that could be a good segue even into more the idea behind the podcast.
Mhm.
So sharing some of who we are, and hopefully that can give some context as to how or why we've even popped up here. But Gabe, honestly, I think you may have been the one who finalized coming up with the idea for the name of the podcast, The Beauty in Between. So, do you want to talk a little more about your heart, vision, thoughts of what we're trying to do behind this, and even why Beauty in Between?
Yeah. So you might notice over time with the ways that I fidget and move around and stuff, but I have ADHD. So, I'm constantly doing something or got to be doing something. And sometimes my attention goes to other things that seem more interesting. Sometimes, they just wants to run around. So there was one time that we were in church service. No offense to our pastor and his message, but I was really interested in doing a podcast with Katie, because she had already come up with the idea of doing a podcast at some point and was trying to figure out who was going to be where, and um, trying to get a better idea of what the general idea of the podcast is going to be. And so once she and I like had that nailed down, yeah, it was a battle of coming up with the name. So I was just writing all these names down in my notes, and that's what I came to, is the beauty in between, because it's always such a beautiful picture. I also, we love King's Kaleidoscope, so maybe go check them out. And it's not a promo, but um, yeah, just having that idea of being in between, like these two sides where people oftentimes want to put us into these boxes, and within church or within the world, there's these two completely different sides. We see it all around the world where there's a constant conflict of this side versus the other side, but we are here to explore some of the nuances, the in betweens, of these different subjects, and the fact that there is beauty in it. Like, it's awesome to be able to hear other people's views, and that's why we love hearing people's stories. Is because yeah, we think they're very important, and everybody has a different thing they've experienced for a different reason. And so being able to kind of combine those things, and to also have more gentle approach to these subjects, where a lot of times people have been told this is how it is within the church, and they've always stuck with the idea, but nobody really knows why. And so it's just kind of a thing that just lies there, and people accept it. And the tough thing with that is, we want to help people feel accepted and help people feel heard. But were they very heard or, seen within the 1800s? Maybe not as much. And so helping now to bring some of that to the table, and showing people that there is joy to be had within these subjects, and that dialogue is a really important thing. And we're not necessarily the experts upon everything,
We're
but
definitely not experts
yeah,
on
hearing
anything.
hearing a little bit of our background, those are some of the things that we're going to talk about. Is some of these things about introvertedness, ADHD, medication. There's going to be all sorts of topics, exploring the nuances and seeing what we have to bring to the table. But we'd also love to hear what other people have to bring to the table. So we'd love to have some community interaction and everything. But that's kind of where the idea comes out of, is having something different than what's all out there and all the resources.
Yeah. And something to build on a little bit as well from everything that you just shared is that one, even the timing of us starting this podcast finally, I find really interesting because I actually had the thought and idea that having a space and holding intentional space to engage with conversations that maybe some grew up in the church and heard that they shouldn't be asking those sorts of questions, or that
Mhm.
if you ask questions then you're just a doubting Thomas and get dismissed, or maybe you didn't grow up in the church and are trying to ask questions of maybe Christians you've run into and have gotten really trite answers.
Mhm.
And really, what the thought was behind just starting this podcast and this space is hopefully creating a space, a starting point,
Yeah.
of just sort of growing a community, really, of just conversations with friends. Not from a, we're not experts, we're not mental health professionals, although we care about and value mental health, and have had different experiences and all of that. But just having real honest conversations of
Mhm.
things that personally I feel like the church, and I'll be specific, that the American church, I don't think has done a good job of equipping, of leaning into, of trying to answer. And some of that is even the way that this nation was built. There's a very strong sense of right or wrong, or black or white, or far right or far left in any given space. All of those, it's this or that, it's us or them, right? All of
Mhm.
that sort of rhetoric and all that sort of language is so common nowadays that we, and I say we, the American, capital C church, have, I think, really forgotten that the essence of the holy text that we were left with, and even the essence of who our God is, was constantly breaking boxes and breaking people's categories, and that even the way that scripture is written, it's not just right or wrong or do this or don't do that, although sometimes that's part of it. But even Jesus said that I want your mercies, not your sacrifices. Like,
Hmm.
our faith is a faith of internal shifts, of internal change. Our faith is a faith that should be able to hold space and welcome mix a diverse group of backgrounds, cultures, questions, that our God is big enough to hold all those things. So our faith should be a space where we can bring different questions and different thoughts, and different doubts, even, or whatever it might be. So that sort of, in my experience, especially given that I've worked in a couple of different churches around the Austin area, before I started working in this nonprofit, I feel like I've seen the dirty underbelly of like big church TM in America. And there are just so many things that I think we've missed. And I don't
Hmm.
just say that for the sake of, you know, we've messed up and we need to burn it all down. Although I would be lying if I didn't say that I was there for a period of time. Um, but really, there is a sense of, I think we've missed it, but there's such a huge opportunity that we have as believers stepping into the world on a daily basis to be able to truly bring God's peace and God's curiosity into every space that we walk into. And even just the understanding that the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith, I would argue, is certainty. So if we're hitting a point in culture, which I would say that we're here, where there are self-touting experts, quotation marks, stating that they absolutely know the right way and the final answer of what time Jesus is coming back and exactly what that really confusing text meant or whatever. If we're at a time where everyone around us is saying that they're right and there are different conflating messages, then I think we have a problem. So hopefully, all that being said, the heart of this podcast is that we can engage in just everyday, honest topics with curiosity at the center of it.
Yeah, and I really want to highlight what you said earlier about leaving a space for this discussion. Like these some of these topics that we're going to be going through, they're things that we've experienced in our lives, either recently or even way before when we were growing up. And a lot of these things have caused pain for us or caused pain for somebody else around us. Being in this kind of indecision while having two different voices, yelling or screaming at you. And so helping to open up that floor and to make sure that these discussions are going on, because truly that's what we think will really change things over time. I don't think I'm going to make a huge difference by just talking to individual people, or you know it might not be as big of a difference as I would love to make. Like I'd love to see the church be able to just be able to deal with these things well, and really trying to learn and read from the word instead of just spouting out what other people have learned. And so leaving that room for discussion and leaving that room for care is such an important thing. And that's really, yeah, what our vision is with this, is to help people, to feel like they're heard whenever we have our different conversations, and hearing people's different stories, having guests on who are able to speak to these sort of things. And then also having different people's stories, whether it's questions or answers. We'd love to invite everybody into discussion space and just a space of thinking. So that's our big vision with the Beauty in Between podcast, and yeah, looking for a healthy way to approach your faith, and like you said, a sense of curiosity.
Yeah. And also, so to our listeners, if you're this far in, if you're really diving into episode one with us, first of all, thank you
Thanks.
for trusting us, for jumping in so far. And secondly, I thought about this while you were sharing, Gabe. This is sort of my invitation to those of you listening that, hopefully by the end of season one and hopefully many seasons to come down the road, that we're going to be best friends one day.
Yeah,
I've
the thought just popped in my head of like, it might not be the same for you, but for me, I'm like, I love talking, with you and with other people, but I hate being listened to. Cause like then it's all up in the air, like what they're gonna think, how they're gonna feel, and all these things. But knowing
ooh,
that somebody out there needs or maybe wants to hear what you're saying and it might be useful to them. So getting our voices out there, even though they might not be everything, um, we love to just help people to see regular people like us who are, contemplating and fighting these things at the same time. Um, and we've spent time trying to figure these things out, but we're still, like I said, it's a constant battle or a constant need to be looking into things. And so yeah, we know that a lot of people are like that. So we'd love to, have a good community of people who are all curious, who are all interested in want to search into things and understand why and how it works for them.
yes. So we're gonna be best friends. Hey, besties.
Yes.
And we're gonna be experimenting. So, hopefully you can come along with us for the journey of experimenting, how we intro, how we outro, our recording setup. This is actually take number 2 of recording the first episode. And experimenting, possibly with connecting with y'all through Instagram, Discord, all the different channels. We're just gonna see what works. And honestly, we want to hear from y'all because really the basis of why this podcast, why the beauty in between, why us, why me, why did I start this is that I don't know about you, listener or Gabe, but I have often, especially in the last few years, as things have felt more and more pressurized and even polarized, that I have had so many moments where I feel like I am the only one screaming into the void. So hopefully this podcast can at the very least be a beacon of some sort to those of y'all who are out there who have also had that feeling, who know exactly what I'm talking about, and so that you can know you are not alone. We are not alone. We are out here. There's a
There's a
whole bunch of
desire for
us.
change.
There is a desire for change. And I am absolutely convinced, by the way. Oh, I didn't mention this. I'm a millennial. I feel like I need to self-identify. I'm a millennial. I was born in 1995. So I was born in the 90s and I actually remember the 90s. And one of my past jobs was that, or a couple of my past jobs was that I was a youth pastor. I am absolutely convinced that Gen Z directly, y'all are going to create so much lasting impact and change. And we can unpack why that responsibility has now become abdicated to y'all's generation. But just know that we are so pro you. And I say that as a millennial. Gabe, you're not a millennial.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm just barely in the Gen Z, born in 2000, January 8th. So I just barely didn't get into that gap, or else I could technically say that I was a 90s baby, but I don't think I would remember anything.
No, you get to say you were born in the year 2000,
Yeah, so
which is crazy.
yeah, turn of the century. So yeah, I think like you said just a moment ago, Katie, like there's a desire for change, and there's some people within my generation that are just lost. There's been all these questions of like what are these things useful for? Like what actually matters? Um, and trying to navigate that is super complicated because there's so many questions and so many different thoughts that are whirling around in our brains and so many things that are pulling at us. So really we have to be really intentional to, which I hate saying the word intentional because that's like Christian buzzword, but
It is now.
being intentional. And I think even the idea of, in Romans where it says, be not conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Like how can we help renew our minds? Um, and yeah, look at things with a fresh view. And so that's our desire with this.
I guess our formal invitation to you, our listeners, or possibly viewers, if we get it together and put this on YouTube. Which, if we do put it on YouTube, leave us a comment congratulating us because that's definitely new. But with all that being said, that I think really the invitation here is that if you are looking for others screaming into the void, if you're looking for others who care about imagining a new way forward of the church for those who are dissatisfied with what the American church has had to offer so far,
Mhm.
if you're wondering if Jesus or the church or his people are worth it or what's the deal with faith, just in general right now, you have a safe place. We would be honored for you to join us on this journey. So hopefully, most of y'all stick around and feel free to share with others as we go. And yeah, our real goal here is just to create a community and ongoing conversation.
Yeah, thinking of this is the beauty in between podcast for those who scream into the void together.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
a, it's a strange tagline, but
I like it. Scream into the void with us. Except for hopefully we can create and build a path out of the void
yeah,
together.
there's a part of that, like we said,
There we
of
go.
being able to show people their potential and being able to show people joy. That's like one of our big desires in life. Like especially for me, I didn't really have a whole lot of those people who helped me to see fully who I could be, and being able to see for myself the joy that was in that. And so, yeah, join with us together while we imagine the dream of a better world that we can be a part of making.
Yes. And also, thank you before we sign off. Huge thank you to the Chasing Justice Podcast Network. Huge thank you to Sandra and also Roslyn, who's the podcast manager, producer. She's kind of all things research and brilliance within the Chasing Justice team. Thank you, Roslyn, for helping us get all the things set up. Thank you to the digital team for helping us with the graphics and all of that. And yeah, so we will see y'all soon and talk soon.
See y'all later. I was seeing if the cat
Bye.
was in the background. Goodbye. Maybe next
Okay,
time.
bye.